A very warm welcome to the teaching for the parish evangelisation cells, and the theme I have chosen is Reluctance to Confession. Pope Francis, in his Lenten message, exhorts us to take up the Lenten journey with enthusiasm. He once again earnestly asks the entire Catholic community to participate in the 24 Hours for the Lord initiative, which will take place from Friday, 9th of March, to Saturday, 10th of March, by celebrating the sacrament of reconciliation in the context of Eucharistic adoration. The Holy Father says that the words found in Psalm 130, verse 4, and I quote, "With you is forgiveness," the sixth of 7 penitential psalms found in the Psalter, that is, in the book of Psalms, have inspired him to be the theme for this year's celebration. This teaching has also been occasioned by one of these penitential psalms. I'm referring to Psalm 32, which essentially focuses on the beneficial effect of confession of sin without deceit or reservation. A frank confession, which truly leads one to experience divine blessing and forgiveness. The psalmist, in verses 1 to 2, uses 3 distinctive Hebrew terms for human sin, highlighting its subtle nuances, shades of meaning. First, sin is transgression, which means rebellion against God. He uses this term, transgression. He uses also the word sin, which means turning away deliberately from the right path. Sin is skewing from God. And the third word he uses is iniquity, waywardness, crookedness, perversion, evil, guilt. And sin is disrespect for God. I quote the first verse, "Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven," which means taken away, lifted or carried, whose sin is covered over, hidden. Verse 2, "Blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit," deception. Verses 3 to 5 are actually the marrow of this autobiographical psalm, and accurately resonate with my personal account of confession. Frankly, I truly wrestled with an unconfessed sin in the past. But having unreservedly acknowledged it, I experienced the joy of forgiveness. The psalmist likewise describes his personal journey that moves from an initial reluctance to confess a hidden sin to a frank, open acknowledgement of sin, which is accompanied by contrasting descriptions of the consequence of his attitude. Verse 3, I quote, "For when I kept silent, my bones worn out through my distressing cry, through my anguish all day long." Verse 4, "For day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was dried up as in the summer heat." These verses, my dear friends, explicitly, unambiguously show how soul and body interact. When things are wrong inwardly in us, they affect us outwardly. Refusal to sin, refusal to confess sin, leads to internal anguish, accompanied by loss of physical strength and persistence in waywardness, crookedness, perversion. Only open acknowledgement puts a stop to mental and physical affliction. There is no escape from divine disapproval of an unconfessed, unexpressed, or repressed sin. I have just quoted, "For day and night your hand was heavy on me." God's hand was heavy on the psalmist. However, God's heavy-handedness, which is in actual fact love surrounding the psalmist, awoke him, instigated him to confess his sin, and opened the door to God's forgiveness, to divine forgiveness. Quote verse 5. "I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover over, hide my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave, took away, lifted the iniquity of my sin." Once the psalmist has openly confessed his cover-up sin, not only has his sin been completely forgiven, but what happened? But he has surprisingly, unexpectedly been able to experience the lifting of a great burden, the sudden opening up of a future not haunted by the past. That's what guilt does for us. Namely, the taking away of the terrible, crushing weight, like a stone, crushing stone, of guilt or iniquity. I think two fundamental truths emerge from this verse, verse 5. 1. A guileless confession, which means an open, frank confession, brings forth two things: forgiveness of sin, and also release from the agony of guilt. 2. Reconciliation with God requires two movements, namely our turning to Him and His turning to us, His response to us. We have to do nothing to gain His forgiveness, but confess with humility. Jesus Christ, His Son, has already paid the costly price, the expensive price for our forgiveness, in being willing to carry away the iniquity of our sin. Let us listen to those evocative words of Paul, one of the most important texts in the scripture. I'm referring to 2 Corinthians 5:21. I quote, "For our sake, he, God, made who? Christ, to be sin, who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." What can we make of this powerful quotation from Paul's second letter to Corinthians? What he's trying to tell us, Paul. God, Paul is saying to us, has imputed or credited the iniquity of our sin to Christ. And he has also imputed or assigned Christ's righteousness, his sinlessness, to all who believe in him. What a powerful exchange. Yeah? Confessing our sin is, to all intents and purposes, to judge ourselves. Again, Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, says, if we openly judged ourselves, God would not have to do it for us. 1 Corinthians 11:31. Keeping quiet about our sin and pretending innocence aggravates the situation. Where silence rules, we side with death. We become distant, afflicted physically and emotionally, and separated from God. I want you to discuss these following questions at the cell meeting. The psalmist, for whatever reason, initially refused to unburden himself before God. And this self-imposed silence led to what appears to be a corrosive pain, I dare to say a cancer, at the heart of his emotional as well as spiritual well-being. My dear friends, in the same way, why should we be reluctant to unburden ourselves before God in the sacrament of reconciliation? Why? Do we feel the iniquity or guilt of our sin is so repulsive that is beyond redemption? God bless.